Chechnya is on the brink of a new war. The head of the republic is on his deathbed, and there has been an assassination attempt on the potential successor.
Someone fired at Kadyrov's car with, I think it's called a Muka grenade launcher. And then they found an abandoned Toyota Land Cruiser with Krasnodar license plates there.
What are the risks of a new power struggle in Russia's most unruly region, and who might end up on the throne as a result?
It could be individuals who maintain strong connections to the administration in Moscow, or various figures who are closely associated with different Chechen clans, whether it is Magomed Danudov or the widely recognized commander Abdi Alauddinov.
Why is Moscow so afraid of the overthrow of its own appointee?
The situation is quite tense in both Dagestan and Ingushetia as well. And of course, if Chechnya catches fire, it will ignite everything around it.
Today, we'll talk about the preconditions for a new third Chechen campaign, why the Kadyrov clan is already being written off, and what a new government in the region could lead to. We will now recall the previous devastating wars in the Chechen Republic, exactly how they ended, and what strategic lessons were learned in both Moscow and Grozny. Watch the evolving prospects of a potential new civil war in Chechnya right now, only here on the Arsenal program. Ramzan's iron grip has weakened. Rumors about his illness have been regularly circulating online for the past few years. And even though Dandan keeps surviving time after time, he looks worse and worse. The most high-profile story about the disappearance of the head of the Republic happened last summer, when the media reported that he nearly drowned at one of the Turkish resorts. According to analysts, the drowning was carefully planned.
I strongly suspect that what actually happened was Kadyrov being admitted to a medical facility somewhere in Turkey, because it is quite clear that the sanctions primarily hit Russian healthcare. And apparently, this whole elaborate story about his supposed drowning and subsequent rescue is highly questionable. A person who is never left alone for even a single second could not have possibly drowned or choked on water when surrounded by a team of people, the most modest of whom likely holds one of the very highest and most elite professional swimming qualifications. Accordingly, I firmly believe this was simply a carefully orchestrated special operation designed to legitimize his extended stay in Turkey for specialized medical treatment and facilities.
By the end of the year, Ramzan's condition worsened again. He was even absent from Putin's important annual state address, and ended up returning once again to the clinic. Apparently, realizing that doctors wouldn't be able to keep bringing him back from the brink forever, Kadyrov decided to play it safe and prepared his son as his successor. However, the idea of dancing to the tune of a spoiled child did not appeal to everyone in the Republic.
But no matter how much you dress up a teenager in camouflage, no matter how many times you seat him at the head of the table at security meetings, no matter how many awards you hang on him or titles you bestow, he remains an 18-year-old teenager. Unlike his feudal peers who once led principalities and empires, Adam Kadyrov did not grow up on military campaigns, and was not commanding soldiers at the age of 12. What we have before us is an ordinary, spoiled rich kid, raised in extremely sheltered conditions, in a palace, surrounded by several layers of security who made sure not a hair fell from his august head.
The culmination of the story was Adam Kadyrov's car accident in mid-January of this year. Initially, the story was presented as if the teenager's motorcade crashed into another car. A random driver was killed, while the younger Kadyrov was taken away in serious condition. However, as time goes on, more and more details are emerging.
My, reliable sources from deep inside Chechnya say that this wasn't a simple accident at all, but rather a deliberate attempted murder. And even the criminal cases initiated by the Republic's investigative committee are under Article 205 and Article 317. To put it in different terms, this is a cold-blooded murder and a terrorist act, since Kadyrov's car was targeted and fired upon with what I believe is specifically referred to as a Muka grenade launcher. And then they found an abandoned Toyota Land Cruiser with Krasnodar license plates, where one Muka had been fired and two more were still intact. So they hit the target with the first shot.
At the same time, it's worth noting that the accident itself in Chechnya. In Russia, this is being carefully hushed up, and the remains of Adam Kadyrov's car were taken to Moscow for an explosives expert examination.
If this really was an assassination attempt, it tells us that despite the fact that Kadyrov Sr. is still alive, the struggle for power in Chechnya has already broken out in full force today. And accordingly, various clans and, of course, the Kremlin have already begun to fight for this power in Chechnya.
It's not hard to guess how this might end, but the main condition of any power struggle is, of course, the removal of the previous ruler. While no one has yet dared to openly raise a hand against Ramzan, the fight against his clan is already in full swing.
Many sources say that his health is so bad that apparently this year will be the last for Ramzan Kadyrov. So absolutely no one can possibly guarantee that when Ramzan Kadyrov eventually passes away, his sons and relatives won't simply be exterminated and killed. Because, well, this clan has deeply wronged and systematically ruined the lives of not just dozens, not just hundreds, but thousands of people in the Chechen Republic.
At the same time, besides sworn enemies, it seems that even Kadyrov's own supporters have turned against him. There is information that his right-hand man, Abdi Aladinov, who commands the Chechen fighters in Ukraine, is already gradually pulling them back to Chechnya. According to experts, it was likely the Kadyrovites themselves who could have been involved in the assassination attempt on Adam Kadyrov. After all, not everyone can fire a grenade launcher, let alone with such accuracy.
There were so many of these very same grenade launchers produced during the First and Second Chechen Wars, and they continue to circulate in such incredibly large numbers throughout the region of Chechnya that, of course, by looking at the used weapon alone, it is absolutely and completely impossible to identify the specific perpetrator. In reality, it could potentially be almost anyone. And in fact, it could be individuals who are closely connected to the leadership in Moscow, or people associated with a variety of different influential Chechen clans, whether it's Davudov or the well-known Abdi Aladinov, who is also widely considered to be one of the prominent potential contenders for the position of head of the republic.
Moreover, given Aladinov's close ties with Moscow, this option seems to suit many in the Kremlin. After all, Putin's primary objective today is to firmly maintain the region within Russia and under its control, regardless of the ultimate cost.
He's, well, for the Kremlin, more or less, firmly under their strategic control. And of course, the various events that are unfolding in the Republic today, I think, is certainly not something that currently suits the Kremlin. Especially since, as we understand, if Chechnya flares up, the entire North Caucasus will catch fire after it. And if indeed the situation in the Republic becomes unmanageable, then it becomes very difficult for the Kremlin to deal with everything that is happening around it, because the situation is already quite tense in both Dagestan and Ingushetia. And of course, if Chechnya catches fire, it will ignite everything around it.
And Putin remembers very well how this tends to happen. The bloody power struggle of the 90s, which didn't even succeed on the first try, will forever remain in the memory of Russian security forces as a shameful page in their history.
Much like what is happening in Ukraine today, the Russian authorities have clearly made a very significant mistake. They thought that 10, 12 tanks would roll in and everyone would scatter. It was just so ridiculous. They were shut up, their armored vehicles destroyed, and that was the end of it. That was the very first initial attempt, and then it became increasingly and painfully obvious that there would be a war, and it would be a brutal and devastating conflict. Of course, the Chechens were psychologically and internally prepared for this war.
In the end, the First Chechen War, and then the Second, claimed the lives of tens of thousands of Russian soldiers. With the help of Russian bayonets, Ramzan Kadyrov came to power, betraying his own people and swearing allegiance to Moscow. But it seems his time is coming to an end.
There's Ramzan Kadyrov, there's Chechnya under him and as part of the Russian Federation. Without Ramzan Kadyrov, there are a lot of questions about what will happen next in Chechnya.
But for the first time in 20 years, it seems the region itself might be able to breathe more freely, though it will have to fight hard for that chance. Did you like this video? Then be sure to take a moment to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our official YouTube channel, Arsenal, for more exciting content. The direct link is located in the description section right below the video.
Sergey, well, it's been a while since we last buried Ramzan Kadyrovich, and here we are about to do it again. Today there was news that of course seems like a fake, but we want to believe it so much that we almost want to believe even this fake. Although, to be fair, the way it's been presented does make you stop and think. Maybe it has already happened. In particular, he was the first. This was reported by the Telegram channel Applaud Ishkeria. I'll just quote it. Ramzan, dite. At 9:03 on January 21st in Grozny, the head of Chechnya passed away. Our source reports that kidney failure ultimately led to cardiac arrest, although a kidney transplant operation had been scheduled for the next day. He was very eager to see his son after the car accident. Well, he was so eager, apparently, that he just burst. But in fact, their meeting never happened. No one will tell you about this anytime soon. An order has already been given to keep silent until the green light is given, to release the information to the public. They're deciding who will be the next head of Chechnya. It seems the Kadyrov family has no intention of giving up power. But we'll tell you more about that later. What do you think? Is this just another fake, or does it actually seem true?
You know, for now, I am very skeptical about this information. Very skeptical. Because we must not forget that there is a war going on, not only on the front lines, a hot war, but we also have a war that is just as intense in the information space. And this really looks like an information psychological operation, because the Kadyrov family is currently in a weak position, a very weakened situation, as a result of which, well, we know that Adam Kadyrov was actually in a car accident and is really in the hospital, somewhere. It's not known where, but he is in the hospital because they really can't show him. They're spreading some fakes using his old canned recordings. There's really nothing special, especially since a Kadyrov family plane was flying there as well. I mean, at the same time as the Emercom flying hospital. So both options are possible. By the way, there was this funny theory that Ramzan, or rather Adam, was deliberately put in an accident so they could then remove his kidney and transplant it to his father. So I even tried to incorporate a lighthearted joke about it during one of my recent professional interviews, and personally wrote a specific headline focused specifically on this particular topic. A kidney for Adam's father, for real. And there, they'll take Ramzan apart for spare parts. And in principle, of course, there's no smoke without fire. That is, it's obvious that they can't show Adam, and they can't show Ramzan either. I think, as you said, this is still an opposition Chechen channel, and that's why they're naturally launching a very aggressive information psychological operation. In order to overthrow Ramzan and to portray him as a weak person. But for now, this claim about Kadyrov's death still reminds us of Valery Dmitrievich Solovey and his story about Putin in the refrigerator.
But what makes it more interesting is the information that supposedly was covered up. And we all understand perfectly well that if this were to happen, if Kadyrov were to die one of these days, and maybe he really has already passed away, naturally his death would be concealed, just as they used to do back in the Soviet Union. I also remembered, back at the beginning of our collaboration, you told a very interesting story about some Moscow bigwig. They hid the death of this Kremlin figure for almost a month. Do you remember?
It wasn't a Moscow bigwig, it was Aliyev Senior. Aliyev Senior. They did not officially announce that he had passed away for a period of several months, or perhaps even longer than that. And when COVID started, when Zhirinovsky died, they also hid it for 3 weeks. They didn't say that Zhirinovsky had died. They kept it from the Russian Federation. It remains somewhat of a mystery why, because he really wasn't such a prominent or influential individual, although judging by the extraordinarily grand and expensive funeral they gave him, actually it's... By the way, I was really stunned by that lavish funeral. They held his farewell at the house of the Yunyas. Stalin and Lenin were also farewelled there, in that same house of the Unions. We can't even remember who else among the great Russian statesmen had their farewell there. I think the last time was probably with Yeltsin. Then there was a funeral service for him at the Cathedral of Christ the Savior and the burial at the Novodevichy Cemetery. In other words, he was given a first-class funeral, really. Because formally, of course, he was the deputy chairman of the State Duma. So, in principle, by his position, he qualified for this. But actually, during the specific period when he was dying, I think he wasn't even occupying that particular professional position any longer at all. And that was quite interesting, rather curious to consider. I clearly recall, to be perfectly honest, I was surprised at how extraordinarily lavish a funeral they gave Zhirinovsky.
And maybe it was a play on the nostalgia of Russians, who were already starting to be brought back to the old ways. Back in the USSR, that country was used to grand funerals. Remember the race with the gun carriages? It wasn't that long ago. It's not yet forgotten. Maybe they did it for that reason, for propaganda purposes. As an option, it's actually quite effective. All right, whether Ramzan is dead or not, As they say in Odessa, dead is dead, as long as he's healthy. You can't deny the fact that he looks extremely unwell. Recently, when I came across the fact that he's 49 years old, I'd already forgotten. I was shocked, because for 49, the man looks like a complete wreck. What do you think? Did he do this to himself? Did he bring himself to this fate? Or are there any traces of Novichok, for example, or Polonia?
There are a lot of things, objectively speaking. Here, I absolutely agree with you. I've said the same thing myself. I had an interview where I actually compared him to Trump, who's 79. And look, they look about the same age. But Kadyrov, in fact, isn't even 50 yet. So in reality, he's a very young man. But even I, as I told someone, look at me, I'm not even 65 yet. I'm 64 years old. So I'm 15 years older. 15 years older than Kadyrov. But he looks like an old man who's 25 years older than me, with his beard and all that. He can barely walk, as we've discussed with you before. The latest videos that were shown, by the way, they weren't even full videos, just video fragments. We, as people who work in television, even have a term for this, microfragment, because it's literally just a second-long appearance. And not once in the past few months have we been shown a single video where he walks, where you can just watch him for a few minutes as he moves. Because his gait is absolutely that of an old man. An 80-year-old. He can barely move his legs. So that's clear. And mostly they show him where they claim he's walking for a couple of seconds or a second, and then he's already sitting, right? Well, at least for now, he can still sit, at least on these video cameras. So in reality, of course, there are real health problems. So, did you poison him or not? He could be poisoned. By the way, not only by the FSB, not only with Novichok, they could gather there and poison him as well. Because it's a small republic, and he's not the only one. The entire republic hates him, actually, except for his own clan. Because it's a clan-based tribal system there. And that's why the clan in power takes all the money for itself. Absolutely all of it, 100% of the money. And gives practically nothing to everyone else. That's why all the other clans hate him. But if another clan comes to power, they'll do exactly the same thing. There is a distinct possibility that, you see, it somehow mysteriously transpired that both Kadyrovs entirely disappeared from our field of vision right after they publicly mocked Zelensky. And then they said that well, Zelensky mocked Kadyrov, saying that Donald Trump should have treated Kadyrov like Maduro. And so the elder Kadyrov lashed out in response. Well, how did he respond? A post on his Telegram channel. We don't really know if it was actually him or not, but at least it was written in a way that seemed like Ramzan. At least it matched his style. And then the younger one showed up with a video and said, yes, if my father tells me to, yes, if Putin orders it, I'll be in Kiev in a second and bring Zelensky straight to Chechnya. And suddenly the younger Kadyrov gets into a car accident. So could this also be the hand of Zyuganov and Malyuk? Oh, Zyuganov. Which Zyuganov? Budanov and Malyuk.
It could be Budanov's swan song before he leaves his post. Is that what you're getting at? But I don't think the Ukrainian special services have arms that long yet. Although, of course, anything is possible. Rather, you and I both understand perfectly well that the go-ahead for these special operations, possible poisoning, and the actual car accident was most likely probably given by Putin. And here's another good question that comes up. And if not Putin, then who could have done this against his will?
No, I actually don't suspect Putin at all. Because Kadyrov suits Putin, and Kadyrov has an agreement specifically with Putin. That's why Kadyrov will remain in power physically as long as he can, and as long as Putin is in power. And that's why I don't think Putin would have done anything here. It's not in his interest to remove Kadyrov. There are people around Putin, on one side or the other, meaning either mild critics, or even more extreme hardliners, who basically see Kadyrov as not exactly a proper white Russian guy. And accordingly as not orthodox. And that is exactly why various influential figures like Dugin and Malafiev might view him as someone who systematically extracts up to $5 billion a year from the Russian people, as a result of the tribute that Putin pays to Chechnya from the state budget. as a result of the Russian Federation's defeat in the Chechen War. So these are more likely the roots here. In other words, roughly speaking, Russian Nazism, Russian neo-fascism, Russian nationalism, Russian Orthodox fascism. It is this movement that is very critical of Kadyrov, not Putin himself. Kadyrov suits Putin just fine.